What is up, Bengals Nation? Dre here from Street Hoops, and I need you to sit down for this one, because we are diving headfirst into one of the most disrespected storylines in this entire league heading into training camp. I'm talking about the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line. And listen, for the first time in the Joe Burrow era, all 5 starters are coming back. Same 5 guys. Same room, same chemistry, same voice in the huddle. And you would think that continuity like that would get some love nationally. Nope, not a chance. And I've got the receipts to prove it. See, ESPN just dropped their annual position-by-position offensive line rankings, where they poll executives, scouts, and coaches. The whole league basically weighs in. And guess what, Bengals fans? Not one Cincinnati offensive lineman cracked the top 10. Not Orlando Brown Jr., not Amarius Mims, not Ted Karras, not Dylan Fairchild. Nobody, zero, not a single vote for a group that finished last season playing, by most accounts, some of the best football of the Joe Burrow era. And before you go grab your pitchforks and start typing angry comments about disrespect, hold up. Because what I'm about to tell you might completely change the way you look at this whole situation. Because here's the thing. I don't think this is disrespect at all. I think this is the single greatest opportunity this group has ever been handed. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why this offensive line has a real, legitimate chance to become the best one Joe Burrow has ever played behind in his entire career. But we've got a long way to go before we get there, so buckle up, because this one's going deep. Let's rewind for a second, because context matters here, and national media loves to skip context. Last season, Joe Burrow got hurt. That's a fact. Confirmed, nobody's debating whether it happened, it hurt this team, and it derailed a season that had championship aspirations attached to it. And a lot of national analysts, a lot of casual fans scrolling through their timeline during a random Tuesday afternoon, took that one fact and ran straight to the laziest possible conclusion. The offensive line failed him. Case closed, right? Wrong. So wrong. And this, right here, is where the perception versus reality gap becomes the entire story of this offensive line heading into 2026. Look, could you argue the offensive line played some role in that injury? Sure, maybe, on some level, in isolated moments. But here's what those hot take merchants conveniently leave out. The full picture. Joe's own decision-making in the pocket in certain moments. Jamar Chase getting jammed at the line on specific routes, which changes the entire timing of a given play and forces Joe to hold the ball just a half second longer than he wants to. The constant shuffling this offensive line dealt with early in the season, before the pieces settled into their natural positions. This wasn't some simple, cut and dry, the O-line let him down story. It was a complicated web of variables, scheme, timing, injuries at other positions, opposing pass rush plans specifically designed to attack certain matchups, and reducing all of that complexity down to one lazy sentence is exactly the kind of surface-level narrative that national media loves to run with. Because it's easy, it's digestible, and it gets clicks and engagement. Sound familiar? It should, because it's happening again right now, in real time, with these very same rankings we're talking about today. But here's where it gets interesting. Because perception doesn't change overnight. It doesn't change in a half season. It doesn't change in 3/4 of a season. Changing the narrative around your football team, especially a narrative this deeply rooted in years of frustration from Bengals fans who remember the darker days of this franchise's offensive line struggles, takes sustained, undeniable, in-your-face dominance over time, and that's exactly what this offensive line has a chance to build right now, in 2026. With continuity finally on their side for the first time in the Joe Burrow era. And listen, I want to acknowledge something here, because I'm not going to sit here and act like this criticism came from nowhere. There was a viral tweet last week, you probably saw it float across your timeline, from a well-known analytics-driven football voice, essentially arguing that this offensive line remains a genuine weakness on this roster, not just a perception problem. And look, I respect a well-reasoned take even when I disagree with it. That's a fair point of discussion. It is a talking point. It's always going to be a talking point until this group proves otherwise on the field, snap after snap, game after game. That's just the nature of accountability in this league. But here's my pushback, and I want to be clear this is my opinion, not some proven fact. I think that take is built on a foundation of last year's early season struggles rather than where this group actually finished. And in football, just like in life, how you finish matters infinitely more than how you started. So let's break this room down, man by man, position by position, because every single one of these guys is walking into training camp with a chip on their shoulder, whether they'll admit it publicly in a press conference or not. Start with Amarius Mims. If I'm Mims and I look at these rankings and I see my name isn't even getting a single vote, that's not a slap in the face. That's rocket fuel. Pure, high-octane motivation. This is a guy with a sky-high ceiling, a guy some evaluators already whisper about as a future franchise left tackle for the next decade, and now he's got a real, tangible shot to shut everybody up with his play instead of his words. This is his opportunity to become the tackle that people talk about 20 years from now as the guy who protected Joe Burrow through the best years of his career. The guy who anchored a Super Bowl-caliber offensive line during the prime of a generational quarterback. That's the kind of legacy that's on the table right now, this season, in year 2. But, and this is a real but, he's got to prove it. The flashes were there last year. The physical tools are not in question. Nobody around this league doubts the traits. What's in question is consistency, is technique refinement, is taking that raw ability and translating it into a full 60-minute, 17-game level of dominance. That's what year 2 is all about for a young tackle with this kind of pedigree. And here's something people forget about Mims's rookie year that I think gets buried under the disrespect narrative. The sheer instability he played through. It wasn't a clean, settled situation early on. It was Patrick starting, then it shifted to Risner. Then you had a rookie thrown into the fire at 1.2. It was genuinely chaotic before this line found its rhythm. Mims was trying to develop as a young player while the pieces around him were constantly rotating, constantly changing, constantly forcing him to adjust his communication and his checks on the fly. That's an incredibly difficult environment for any young offensive lineman to develop consistency in, let alone thrive in. And despite all of that noise, all of that instability, he still flashed the traits that made him a first-round pick. Now imagine him with a settled, continuous room around him from day one of camp. Imagine the version of Amarius Mims that gets to focus purely on his own technique instead of constantly adjusting to whoever's lining up next to him. That's the leap I'm talking about. That's why my expectations are through the roof for this specific player in this specific season. Now let's talk Orlando Brown Jr. Here's a guy who's had to fight through injuries for years, genuinely tough, frustrating stretches early in his Bengals tenure where fans were starting to wonder if the big free agent addition was ever going to live up to the contract. And then last season, he finally strung together a full, healthy campaign, and by most accounts. Particularly from about week 6 or 7 onward, he played pretty darn well, arguably some of the best stretch football of his Bengals career. This year, the mission is simple and it's clear. Get back to Pro Bowl level. Not just play like it in the shadows where only die-hard fans and film nerds notice, get recognized for it on the national stage. He hasn't made a Pro Bowl since his Kansas City Chiefs days, and 2026 is the year to change that narrative once and for all. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend the man doesn't have flaws, because that would be dishonest, and I don't do dishonest breakdowns on this channel. He's not winning many races against the league's fastest, most explosive speed rushers. Everybody around this league knows that. The tape doesn't lie, and analytics sites will happily point that out if you go digging. But what he lacks in elite foot speed, he makes up for in raw power, veteran technique, and hand placement that's been refined over a decade in this league. And in this offense, a pass-first system that leans heavily on protection up front to let Joe operate from a clean pocket, that trade-off works. It genuinely works, especially when he's not being isolated one-on-one against the very best rushers in football every single snap. Now let's talk Ted Karras. Steady, reliable, the definition of a professional, a true glue guy in that locker room. People kept waiting for the wheels to fall off. Is he going to slow down? Is this the year age finally catches up to him? Is this the year Cincinnati has to go find his replacement, and instead, the man goes out and quietly puts together maybe his best season in a Bengals uniform? No fanfare, no viral highlight reels, just consistent professional, week-to-week reliability at a position where reliability is everything. If he keeps playing like that this season, maybe there's an extension conversation waiting for him at the end of the year. Maybe there's not, and instead he tests free agency on the back of leading a top-tier offense to a deep playoff run, cashing in one more time on a career built on exactly this kind of quiet excellence. Either way, that's a win-win scenario for a guy who's earned every bit of whatever comes next for him. Dylan Fairchild, man, listen. This is one of my favorite storylines of this entire offensive line breakdown. Third-round rookie, thrown into significant playing time far earlier than most third-round interior linemen ever see, battles through an injury early in the season, and somehow gets better as the year goes on instead of fading. That is not the norm for rookie offensive linemen. That is genuinely rare. Injuries derail rookies all the time. You see it across this league every single season. A promising young player gets banged up in October and just never fully recovers his rookie year rhythm. It didn't derail him. And now we're at the moment of truth. The year 1 to year 2 leap that so many young guards either make or completely fail to make. If this guy is going to become the next great Bengals guard, the next name mentioned alongside franchise legends like Clint Bowling or Kevin Zeitler in this building's history, this is the year we find out for certain. And here's the beautiful part of his situation. He's not walking into year 2 blind, isolated, or starting from scratch. He's got the exact same guys around him. Same system, same terminology, same voice in the huddle calling the protections. That kind of continuity is exactly what accelerates development for a young interior lineman. And if there's one player on this roster I think benefits the absolute most from this rare 5 starters returning situation, it might genuinely be Dylan Fairchild. And then there's Dalton Risner, the story of a guy just looking for a home after bouncing around this league for a few years without ever fully settling in anywhere. Signs a 1-year prove-it deal with Cincinnati, balls out down the stretch of last season, and suddenly this whole thing clicks into place at right guard in a way that genuinely surprised a lot of national analysts who had written him off. And when you ask, name the last time Bengals fans felt this good, this comfortable about the right guard position, you might genuinely have to go all the way back to that very first year Alex Kappa signed here when everybody was raving about the immediate impact of that free agency addition. That's how long it's been since this position felt this settled. If Risner keeps performing the way he did to close out last season, Cincinnati doesn't just become a temporary stop on his journey around the league. It becomes home in every sense of that word for a player who's earned the right to finally plant roots somewhere. So now you're probably asking, okay, Dre, you've hyped up every single one of these guys individually, but what actually changes this year? What's genuinely different heading into 2026 compared to every other offseason we've talked through on this channel? 2 words: continuity and development. This unit did not have stability for most of last season. It was a rotating door early on, different combinations week to week, a rookie getting thrown into action before anybody expected, injuries forcing shuffles across multiple positions simultaneously, and once they finally settled into their true starting 5 somewhere around mid-season, they started to gel in a real, tangible, watch the tape and you can see it way. Real chemistry, real rhythm, real communication pre-snap that you could hear developing week over week if you paid attention to the broadcast. And now, for the first time in the entire Joe Burrow era of this franchise, that exact same group is walking into training camp already knowing each other's tendencies, already speaking the same language up front, already trusting the guy next to them because they've been through a real NFL season together in these exact roles. That is the piece the national rankings simply cannot measure, and I think that's the fairest criticism I can offer of how these evaluations get conducted. You can't quantify continuity on a spreadsheet. You can't assign a numerical value to 5 guys who spent an entire offseason together, who already have their checks and calls internalized, who don't need to relearn each other's habits from scratch. Executives and scouts vote based primarily on tape from last year, not on projected internal growth, not on the natural year 2 leap so many young linemen make, not on what a full, uninterrupted, healthy offseason together can do for a group's overall cohesion and communication. And that's exactly why I'm not mad about these rankings. Genuinely, I'm actually kind of glad about them, if I'm being honest with you right now. Because low national expectations plus a talented, gelling, continuity-driven roster is the exact recipe for one of those everybody said they were overrated heading into the season, and then they went out and proved every single doubter wrong storylines that this league absolutely loves to tell by the time the playoffs roll around. And Bengals fans, you'll know exactly how sweet those redemption storylines taste, because this franchise has lived through the opposite version of that story more times than anybody would like to remember. Now let me be crystal clear about something here, because I don't want anybody twisting my words down in the comments section. This is opinion. This is my personal expectation as someone who breaks down this tape obsessively, not some guaranteed, locked-in outcome. Nobody has confirmed Amarius Mims is going to be a Pro Bowler this season. Nobody has confirmed Orlando Brown Jr. is definitely getting back to that elite level of play. These are educated projections based on what we watched unfold down the stretch last season, mixed with a healthy dose of genuine belief in this specific group of 5 players heading into a pivotal year. But here's where I stand, and I'll say it with full confidence. My expectations for this offensive line are not just cautiously optimistic. They are high, sky high. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, picture me holding my hand up above my head. That's where the bar is set for this group in my mind. Top 10 unit by season's end. Top 12 at an absolute worst-case scenario. That's the standard I'm setting for 2026, especially if this group can stay healthy from week 1 all the way through a deep playoff run. And that's really the variable that determines everything here, isn't it? Health. Because on paper, on continuity, on internal belief, on every single storyline we've walked through today, this group has every reason in the world to take that leap into elite territory. But football is cruel, man. It truly is. One bad injury at the wrong position, one freak non-contact soft tissue thing in August, and this whole storyline flips right back to same old Bengals offensive line problems faster than you can refresh your timeline on a Sunday afternoon. That's the tension sitting underneath everything I've said today. That's the drama heading into camp that nobody's talking about enough. Everything is genuinely in place for this offensive line to author a redemption story for the ages this season. But it only works, it only comes together, if these 5 specific guys can stay on the field together for the majority of this year. Let's talk about what this means for Joe Burrow specifically. Because at the end of the day, that's the entire point of this conversation, isn't it? Everything about this offensive line's success or failure gets measured through the lens of how well it protects the most important player on this entire roster. A healthy, gelling, continuity-driven offensive line doesn't just mean fewer sacks on the stat sheet, although obviously that matters immensely. It means Joe gets to operate from a clean pocket more consistently. It means the deep shots to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins have more time to develop down the field. It means the play-action game hits harder because the pass rush has to respect the run threat up front. It means this offense, which already has as much explosive talent at the skill positions as almost any team in this league, finally gets to operate with the foundational piece up front that turns a good offense into a genuinely historic one. That's the ceiling we're talking about here if this all comes together the way I think it can. And I want to bring in one more piece of context here, because I think it matters for understanding just how far this specific group has come. Go back and think about the offensive line conversations this franchise was having just a handful of years ago, genuinely rough stretches where protecting the quarterback felt like an every-week crisis, where fans were begging front office decision-makers to invest more resources up front, where national analysts weren't debating whether this group was top 10. They were debating whether it was one of the worst units in the entire league. That's not ancient history. That's recent enough that plenty of you watching this video right now remember exactly how frustrating those seasons felt. So when I look at where this roster sits today, 5 returning starters, a former first-round tackle entering year 2 with real continuity, a steady veteran center, a promising young guard building on a strong rookie campaign, and a right guard who finally found a home, I don't see a disrespected unit. I see a genuine transformation story that the national conversation simply hasn't caught up to yet. And that